just give some introductions to kick things off, and then we'll start. I've just let people know that you were just having a few glitches getting in, but you're here, so that's great. So I'd just like to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome everybody to today's Infrastructure Intelligence Live in the Spotlight interview that we're obviously having with yourself, Sir John Armitt. And I think it's fair to say that for most people working in the infrastructure and construction sector, Sir John needs no introduction, but he's going to get one anyway, because it would be rude not to. Of course, Sir John is chairman of the National Infrastructure Commission, and is I think it's fair to say one of the most knowledgeable and high-profile individuals within our sector, and we're really pleased to have him in the spotlight this morning. Just to say that we have a lot of questions for Sir John, and undoubtedly there may well be some that come in through the chat, which I will basically field if there are any on, that aren't on our list. So people feel free to put their questions in the chat to Sir John this morning. We've got around about 45 minutes for this interview, and hopefully, things, will go well. Just a little bit more about Sir John. For those that don't know, Sir John, back in the day, produced, I think, quite a seminal report, which became known as the Armitt Review into infrastructure planning in the UK. And I think it's fair to say that many of the conclusions of that report have since filtered their way through into the way in which the sector actually works. And I think it's fair to say as well that many of those conclusions actually resulted as well in many ways in where we are with the National Infrastructure Commission itself. I'm going to talk about the National Infrastructure Commission a little bit later on. So John's also had some key roles with organisations like Railtrack. Also, famously, he was chair of the Olympic Delivery Authority, which I've no doubt we will have a conversation about a little bit later on. He's also a former president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and famously as well, he received a knighthood for his services to engineering and construction in 2012. But just to kick things off, Sir John, if I may, if I can ask you first of all, what made you want to get into the construction sector? What was it about the sector that appealed to you?
Well, it was really quite simple. I decided that I was going to leave school at 16 and not do A-levels. And I then was casting around as to what I might do. And I got a leaflet, which was published at the time by the Institution of Civil Engineers. And it described civil engineering. And it described it as harnessing the resources of nature for the benefit of mankind. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. And then there was this photograph on the front of the pamphlet of a guy standing up to his knees in mud with a theodolite and a scraper in the background, and so on. And then inside it talked about the opportunities to travel and work outdoors, etc., etc. So I put all of that together. So I thought, well, that sounds great. So I then went down to Portsmouth College of Technology in those days, before it became even a polytechnic, and I could enroll on a diploma in civil engineering course, which gave me exemption from the Institution of Civil Engineers entry exams. So that's what I did. And 4 years later, after 3 years at college and a year on site, I'd done all that was necessary and joined John Laing.
So obviously you were really into the sector in that way. Thinking about how we attract people into the industry today, do you think we've we've got the approach right? How do we ensure that the industry is seen as attractive to particularly, that newer layer of younger people who maybe have got other things on their minds, and maybe construction isn't the first job that comes into their heads?
I think it's whether you describe construction as such, or whether you talk about what is it that we are doing. And of course, what we're doing, what the industry does, is provides the fundamental underlying ingredients of civilization. Without water, without drainage systems, without power, without buildings, without means, the infrastructure to travel, society doesn't work. And to me, that remains the great attraction of the industry. Because what we have to do is we have to find ways to get into the schools and be able to talk to children, probably from about the age of 12 or even younger, about what is entailed in infrastructure, in the whole building industry, and how it serves society and how exciting it can be.
Just on that, what's the best argument that you've heard for persuading young people to join this sector?
Well, I think, as I say, at the end of the day, you're doing something which is of real value to the whole of society. You're doing something which is physically manifest. So at the end of the day, you can see something for your efforts. And of course, to young people today, we are dealing with the challenges of climate change. And so civil engineers, environmental engineers, everybody is designers, everyone in the industry has a part to play in ensuring that we can survive despite climate change, that we can get to net zero by 2050 and so on. The industry is right at the center of everything which needs to be done.
That concept there about the industry being right at the centre of, I suppose, in many ways, all the world's challenges, really, and particularly when we talk about it from a UK perspective, the UK's challenges. Do you think the industry is out there enough in actually saying just exactly that? Because whenever I talk to people about what I do, I say I write about an industry that changes people's lives, that shapes the environment, that shapes the world in which we live. Sometimes I sense, writing about it all the time, some of the people I interview, not necessarily yourself, not at all yourself, can forget that, how big it is, the stuff that we're involved in when you get involved in the day-to-day. Do you think that's something we can explain, more clearly?
I think it's a major challenge, and it's one which I laid down when I became the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers. I said, we as an industry, as a profession, have a responsibility to get out there and explain to the public what we do, why we're doing it. And of course, the why is the big question. So we focus on how we're going to build it. We need to put a lot more attention as to why we're going to build it in the first place. What problem are we seeking to solve? What's going to be the outcome? And if we don't engage the public in what we're doing and why we're doing it and what the benefits are going to be to them, what the challenges are, what the pros and the cons and the issues, then don't be surprised if, in fact, they at times can be extremely negative about it. Only see the disruption during the construction period itself, because that's what they're suffering, is the disruption of the process. Whereas at the end of the day, they get something which is of great value to them. Now, everyone involved, whether they're politicians, whether they're people in the industry, everyone has a responsibility to get out there and talk to the public and explain it. It's something we've been doing in the NIC, actually, is doing quite a lot of working with groups of the public and talking about what we're doing, what their expectations are, and how they can be met.
What's your view on the public perception of infrastructure and construction then? There's a lot of chatter around the industry about, we wrote an article yesterday that said that the public don't understand the value of infrastructure, major infrastructure projects. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that we need to do more?
I think we all take it for granted, don't we? We turn the tap and the water comes out. We go to the loo and it disappears, and hopefully not too much of it finishes up in the river. Because there are water treatment plants, there are all sorts of processes which have been installed to make sure that we don't pollute. We use our transport networks. We take it all for granted because it's there and it's part of our daily lives, and we use it. We don't have to as the average person, we don't really have to think too much about how it's got to us. It's a bit like the old car and the modern car. The old car, we could take it to bits and, we understood how it worked and we could put it back together again. We wouldn't know where to start with the modern car because, it's entirely different. So we just take our modern car for granted that it's going to start every morning, and almost it was better when it was unreliable because you had to know more about it. When something is extremely reliable, you take it for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that old. I think it was a Dunlop advert where you had a couple of tennis players playing tennis on the tennis court, and basically everything that, I think it was Dunlop anyway, everything that they produced disappeared, and it went all the way down to the person's underwear who was playing tennis, because it was all to do with rubber and this, that, and the other. Yeah, and I just often think if we could only do something similar that showed what infrastructure does. Maybe you'd end up with a blank page, I don't know, but it just struck me watching that advert. Good grief, I had no idea they did all of that. And maybe that's something that we need to try and recreate somehow. So,
I mean, if you sit down with 6 members of the public and say, what does infrastructure mean to you? First thing they'll say is transport. And then you work your way through, and at the end of 10 minutes, you've got the whole lot assembled. But, you have to get them to think about it. Oh, yes, it's that, it's the other. And of course, the one which is coming up on the fast side all the time is telecommunications, and what we're using today. The whole digital world is becoming more and more central to everything.
Just on that, you talked about taking things for granted, and obviously society's taken a lot of things for granted in the recent period, and it's only when it's taken away that you actually realise it. And inevitably, we're going to talk a little bit about the current situation. Around COVID. How do you think infrastructure has actually stepped up to the mark in relation to, what we're going through at the present time, and what your observations on the effects of the current crisis on our sector? I mean, have you got any thoughts on that, and maybe bring in some of the experiences of the NIC on this one as well?
Gosh, that's a big question. I mean, clearly, the aspect of infrastructure which has enabled us as a society to keep going is, in fact, our digital communication systems. Without those, we would be in real trouble. So it's opened up to us, and probably, as everybody says, we've advanced 3 years in 6 months in terms of the way in which we use it and our familiarity with it, and so on. I mean, at the NIC, we've had to get everybody largely over the last 6 months working from home. And we're just about to start going back into the office, but like all offices, you can only get 30% of the people in if you follow the social distancing rules and so on. So that's creating logistical challenges. I mean, there are other ways in which people, I think, have realized they can be more efficient. I mean, I'm on the board of Berkeley Homes, and we've reopened now nearly all of we have reopened all our sites. We're working at about 90% capacity, but there is a recognition that we're also working more efficiently because we're having to plan more. And by planning more and having to think ahead more, we're actually getting more efficiency out of our operations than we did before. So out of this sort of setback, in a way, I think there's a great opportunity for us as an industry to, at the end of the day, become more effective and more efficient.
Just on that, I mean, you mentioned their infrastructure, and obviously digital infrastructure, and clearly, I think everybody probably on this watching this interview would have been, well, they wouldn't be able to watch the interview in the first place if they didn't have reasonable broadband. Do you think the infrastructure sector gets enough credit for digital infrastructure? Because it's often seen as an IT thing, by maybe the public at large, and maybe there's something there that we can actually, get the word out on more, because it has been absolutely crucial during the course of this crisis, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by infrastructure, but I mean, yes, clearly, the most expensive part of delivering fiber, for example, across the country at the moment, and hooking everybody up to much faster speeds, is the most expensive part is digging the trench. The fiber cable itself is extremely cheap. It's much better than copper. It has much better qualities than copper as a means of transmitting the signals. But in fact, the most expensive part is the disruptive part again. So digging up all our streets in order to install it is what people see. It's part of the process. It's a bit like a power station. I mean, you can say, well, we're fantastically important as civil engineers because we put in all these tunnels for cooling water. We do these fantastic foundations and buildings. But actually, it is a means to an end, because the end is the generator and the turbine. That is what actually produces the electricity. We are an enabler to a power station. So whereas something like a railway is, without the tracks, unless we're going to go into a different system altogether, but traditionally on a railway, you need the tracks, you need the civil engineering for the train to run on. They are complete systems. And of course, infrastructure at the end of the day are made up of systems. The big change we're seeing with modern infrastructure is the extent to which data and the use of data and the GPRS and all the different signaling systems, the remote condition monitoring, all of this which goes into infrastructure. So it is why I think at the Institution of Civil Engineers, for example, we broadened the membership recently and said, well, there ought to be a place in the Institution of Civil Engineers for all the different professions who are engaged in delivering that final outcome of something which provides society with a system, a whole system which works.
Just staying on the issue of the current crisis, just for a couple of more minutes. Obviously, it's affected all sections of society, all aspects of life, really, and obviously infrastructure has also been affected by that, and offices and everything else. One of the things that the government has made a key part of their response to the crisis is obviously the whole build agenda that was signalled by the Prime Minister, a number of weeks ago. A great headline, of course, and it's not often you actually, get a Prime Minister with with a sign in front of him that basically is all about a particular sector. I mean, how did you feel about that, seeing that? Do you sense an increased urgency on behalf of politicians to basically use infrastructure to help building out of this crisis? What's your view on that?
Well, clearly, yes. I mean, clearly government sees investing in infrastructure and encouraging the private sector, of course, actually provide probably at least more than 50% of all our infrastructure is actually provided by the private sector. They see that as a means of getting the economy moving. They see it as at the same time, it provides a long-term benefit to the economy. So in the short term, you're creating jobs, you're creating opportunity. It all leads in, of course, to part of their levelling up agenda of trying to spread the levels of economic activity across the UK. It's something which people come back to my original point about why do people go into the industry? Well, you can see a physical manifestation. Build is a way of government showing that here is a physical manifestation of our determination to actually get the economy going again. And it's there in bricks and mortar, as it were.
Interestingly, you mentioned
it's not easy to achieve. But,
interestingly, you mentioned the levelling up.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned the levelling up agenda there. How do you think infrastructure can reduce inequality and current inequalities, which maybe are exacerbated by the COVID crisis and also the climate crisis as well? What role do you think infrastructure's got to play in that? And I suppose that maybe speaks a little bit about social value as well.
Well, in terms of in terms of levelling up agenda, what you're doing is you're increasing connectivity, you're making areas of the country more accessible to one another, you're enabling people to move into and agglomerate their skills in cities by making access better into cities. And you're creating an environment in which investors are more likely to then want to establish their business in those particular parts of the country. You also, of course, need skills. I mean, infrastructure by itself is not going to level up the economy. In association with it, you need the investment. And of course, investors are going to be looking not only for the infrastructure, they're going to be looking for the availability of skills. So training, retraining, and skills are the third leg, if you like, to that total leveling up agenda.
So, I mean, obviously, infrastructure's got to work in partnership with other organisations, and obviously, you know, with politicians as well. You know, we've held a number of events over the summer, webinars and so on, and often what comes up is the role of politicians within infrastructure. Sometimes that's raised in a negative way when they either interfere or don't interfere. You know, et cetera, and sometimes in a positive way when it's, you know, talking about it's really great when politicians get engaged and actually see infrastructure as, you know, something, you know, not just worthwhile, but that can actually help them realize their aims. You're obviously someone who has dealt with politics at close quarters over the course of your career. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the role of politics and politicians in our sector? Because I think it's fair to say that historically our sector has, you know, tried not to get too involved in the politics and focus on the delivery.
Yeah, but there is no
the politics of infrastructure.
Yeah, very simply, there is no infrastructure without politics. Because if it's the public sector, Treasury fundamentally pay for the investment in our roads and our railways. And that's where nearly all the money goes, plus money which goes to flood defences and flood control. So those are the three areas where it's government expenditure. And so clearly politicians are going to decide how much money they can afford, which projects are the most important, and how they value those projects and how they assess which ones they want to take forward. The private sector provides our telecom systems, it provides our energy, and it provides our water networks and so on. But they are working under, in a sense, the oversight of the regulator. The regulator takes his direction from the government. So the government sets the ground rules as this is what I want out of these sectors. And so the private sector it will make its decisions around government policy. It can't make those decisions in isolation because the regulator is saying this is what I'm going to allow you in the next period. I want you to be more efficient. I want you to invest, but you know there is a limit to how much I'm going to allow you to invest, because if you invest too much and that is going to put up the charge to the consumer, then sorry, you know. And so there's this tension all the time between what do we need for the long term, what do we need for resilience, what can the consumer afford to pay. So it's intensely political. So you can't take politics out of infrastructure decision making.
Just on that intensely political sort of point, obviously, you know, we have a number of, you know, major projects at the moment that are ongoing, including one, you know, quite well-known rail project in HS2. You're someone who has got extensive experience of the rail sector, and obviously had an involvement, you know, in the Channel Tunnel rail link as well. Do you think there are any key lessons from that project that potentially could benefit the implementation of HS2, which I think, you know, putting it, you know, sort of, I suppose, kindly, has had some challenges and is obviously an intensely political project. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we learned I say we learned, HS1 or Channel Tunnel Rail Link took a different approach to its route planning. It was much criticized at the time because about 7 alternative routes were published. And so we had the whole of Kent almost in uproar because every village thought that it was going to be threatened by one of these routes. And then there was a 2-year sort of engagement process between the project and the public, at the end of which government made a decision about which route to take. And equally at the end of which the public was saying, please make your mind up what the route's going to be and put us out of our agony, put us out of blight. because as soon as you declare a route, you start to blight properties along that route. So now on the High Speed 2, which in the first place was the wrong name for the project anyway, because it wasn't about speed, it was about capacity, and it was about freeing up places like the West Coast Main Line to increase the service which could be offered on those by having another line which was dealing with the intercity as opposed to the stopping services. But the department looked at an enormous number of routes, but didn't go public with those, and then finally announced this is going to be the route. At which point, of course, you get a load of resistance and uproar and so forth. And it comes back to my earlier point about how do we and what is the best way in which we engage with the public about why we're going to do something, what the options are, what the costs are likely to be, and the choices which are going to have decisions which are political decisions, but which at least the public start to understand the challenges of making those decisions and the benefits which are going to come at the end of the day from the project. So I come back to, we have to engage more if we're going to expect people to understand and support what it is we see the need to build to meet the country's requirements.
What do you think that the industry should be doing in relation to that? You mentioned that the NIC in particular have been doing some work around, I suppose, engaging the public and getting that message across. What do you think that we should be doing more of as a sector, as an industry, that maybe we're not doing at the moment?
Well, it's the people who have the most ability or the most influence in this, of course, at the end of the day, are the clients. So the clients are the ones who are going to be placing an order. The clients are the ones who are going to be deciding, this is what I want, and this is why I need it. So to my mind, all the time, the fundamental leader in the industry is the client, and the client sets the culture, the client sets the tone. The client, if he wants things to run smoothly, has that responsibility and need to actually get out and explain what he's about and why he wants to do something. The rest of us, whether we're contractors or consultants, are then serving that expectation of the client, coming up with ideas, coming up with proposals as to how it can be done. Now, it comes back to your earlier point about how do we get that dialogue going, all of us, in different ways. And there is no grand plan to this. We're not going to get 2 hours of primetime television every evening to talk about it. It is actually, it's at the grassroots where invitations, opportunities to go into the village hall. I mean, I've been in countless village halls over the years, just talking to the WI or talking to whichever society it might be about what we're doing. Or it's going into schools and talking to at speech days or talking to sixth formers about their choices and the opportunities. You've got to use every means at your disposal, really, and see the opportunity as an opportunity to put forward the benefits that that infrastructure brings and the challenges and questions which have to be addressed and asked.
I mean, clearly, one of the challenges, I think, and it's been great to see, the work of the National Infrastructure Commission, because I think maybe for the first time we've started to see a more longer-term view around infrastructure. Do you think that is a big step forward in embedding that longer-term view, particularly around the political systems that we've got to enable more infrastructure projects to come to fruition? Do you think that was an important step?
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental. When I worked with colleagues and produced the review that you mentioned earlier on, at the core of that review was core recommendation was the need for a long-term infrastructure commission, which made recommendations, doesn't make decisions, it makes recommendations to government about what is needed for the long term, the program of infrastructure investment that's going to be required. Now, we published our forward view in 2018, and the government has said that it will publish, and at the moment it looks like being in the autumn, a national infrastructure strategy as a response to that assessment. Now, that will be the first time the country's ever had a national infrastructure strategy. It's not easy, because it's difficult for the government to look forward 15 years and decide how much money it's going to have to spend or what its policies might be around energy or anything else in 15 years' time. But we all know in infrastructure that from the glint in the eye to actually seeing a finished large-scale infrastructure project can be at least 15 years, and sometimes longer. And therefore, that benefit of having that long-term strategy of policy from the government about understanding what it's got to do to meet its climate change challenges, to meet its people movements around the country challenges, to meet the expectation of our digital services, all of that has to be planned and thought through. And if we get this national infrastructure strategy in the autumn, it will be potentially a groundbreaking moment for us, because it'll be the first time that we've had that long-term view.
And you mentioned climate change there, which is clearly absolutely central. It's one of the biggest issues I think facing society, notwithstanding what we've seen, around the COVID, situation. Just 2 points on that. One, how do you see our sector leading in the area of climate change? And also, how are you managing to engage? I'm talking about the Commission, really. How are you managing to engage government and local government as well around climate, people, places, to ensure that the new infrastructure that gets built does meet the ambitions around sustainable communities and a sustainable environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things packaged up in there, aren't there? I mean, climate change per se, we tend to think about CO2 and emissions and how do we reduce our carbon footprint in the future. Now, that fundamentally is going to require a shift away from fossil fuels in our energy systems. And as a sector, we're going to have to provide those new systems. We're doing it at the moment with offshore wind, with solar. There's a big challenge around hydrogen. Are we going to be able to develop carbon capture storage and use those reservoirs in the North Sea, for example, to pump carbon back into, having extracted the hydrogen in a reforming process from the methane? These are challenges which we're sort of saying to government are critical ones which have to be addressed in the next few years. But the other extreme, we've set up a design institute as an offshoot of the National Infrastructure Commission, which is concerned about the use of natural resources, good design, placemaking, all these wider issues of what provides society with, in a sense, enjoyable places to live, places where we're not bespoiling the country, where we're using nature. For example, if you take just flood defense systems, it's not all about building concrete barrier walls. It can actually be about using the floodplains and the natural reservoirs upstream in rivers by planting, and the way in which we treat those natural basins to reduce the flooding downstream, rather than just thinking, oh, well, what happens upstream is what happens, and we'll build more barriers downstream. So there are a whole host of ways in which I think as an industry we can play our part in making sure that we have a more sustainable future. I mean, our materials that we use are highly carbon intensive. Steel and concrete, which we've been using for the last 150 years or longer, go back to the Romans almost, but we're still using the same basic materials. Other industries have moved on massively to use different types of materials. And I think we have a constant challenge in our industry of seeing what we can do to reduce the carbon, the inbuilt carbon of what we design, and how we can think differently about what we design. So we have an enormous part to play in all of this.
I'm glad you mentioned design, because one of the things that hits me about design is that wow factor when you see a structure, a building, a place that you just, it can take your breath away sometimes. And one of the projects that I know you had a keen involvement in, and we'll come on to talk about this now, I hope, is the Olympics in 2012. How did your involvement in that come about, without giving away any secret discussions that you might have had with politicians? And, how did that develop? And can you just reflect a little bit on that and maybe some of the lessons that you learned?
I think my involvement, as with so often, and I think many people on this call will know their involvement, particularly in our industry, is are you available at the time that somebody's looking for an engineer, a project manager, whatever else is for a project? If you're available, then you get an opportunity, and if you're not, you don't. It coincided with my retiring as the CEO of Network Rail, and that the government was looking for a new chairman for the Olympic Delivery Authority, and the timing just worked, and it was an easy, relatively move over for me from Network Rail into chairing the ODA. But I mean, interestingly, I remember during the games being asked by a journalist, which building did I think was the best building on the Olympic Park? And actually, it was a fantastic, it was one of those beautiful days, sun was shining, everything was looking fantastic. And I said, well, actually, it's the landscaping. I said, you know, what people are enjoying here is the most fabulous park in which a river has been restored. We've created all this soft and hard landscaping, enormous amount of thought gone into the planting. So which flowers are going to be in bloom during the games, and so on and so forth. And I said, it is what we've created is a fantastic place. There are a series of individual buildings which have their own qualities, whether it's the aquatic centre or the velodrome or the actual stadium itself, all with their different qualities. But overall, what we've done is create a new place in London, which people will not only want to come to for the games, but of course will come back to in legacy. And today, of course, that whole area is continuing to develop with more businesses, with more housing, with more cultural buildings going up now as well. So you create a whole new, very desirable place for Londoners. And I think that was what became the fantastic achievement. We used to say, you know, the Olympic Games last 6 weeks, but we're actually investing for the next 60 years.
I mean, what I thought was interesting at the time as well was I remember when we were bidding for the Olympics, and I think it's fair to say that it wasn't unanimous that, you know, certainly within our industry, I think, at least initially, that we should even bid, you know, for the Olympics. And I remember watching some fantastic videos, really, you know, emotional videos with great soundtracks and stuff. And I just thought, we've got to go for this. You know, this will be absolutely fantastic. And did you have any sense of maybe there was some doubt, you know, at first? And how did it feel when, because obviously everyone looks at that now and thinks, well, what a fantastic project. I mean, you know,
I mean, during the bidding stage, I wasn't involved. I mean, the bid was fundamentally led by Tessa Jowell, who was the minister who persuaded Prime Minister and Chancellor that this is something we should go to, and Ken Livingstone, the Mayor of London. And Ken, of course, famously said, look, I'm not interested in sport. I am interested in the regeneration of the East End of London, and that particular part of the East End of London. He saw it as a regeneration project. He saw it as a legacy project. And so you had these two things came together, the chance for Britain to put its flag on the map and celebrate and have this fantastic sporting occasion. And at the same time, create what I think has been the real lasting value is that phenomenal legacy for that part of London. And of course, that when we actually held the games, as we all recollect, it was, you know, Britain at its proudest. We did something we could be proud of. Danny Boyle in producing the opening ceremony was a classic piece of fantastic. Only the Brits could do that. Sort of would think about rolling out some of the things in that opening ceremony,
which of course featured infrastructure as well, you know, and featured industry and
the whole story of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's interesting, you know, that whole regeneration. I mean, it's not there anymore because there's a great park there now, as you've just described. And I remember going there and having a look at it, sort of, you know, a year and a half after the Olympics, because I'd only ever been to the stadium because I got to the Paralympics, and I went to look at the old office, and it was absolutely unbelievable. You know, someone who'd actually worked in an industrial estate, and then to see what had been created, talk about transformation and changing people's lives. I think, you know, that was absolutely incredible. And if only we could get everyone to experience that radical change. Although I suppose people do experience radical change when they see new infrastructure taking place in their areas as well. So, you know, it is all around us, isn't it, really, I suppose, in that respect?
No, and I think, you know, some of the best moments I can remember, it must be a year, 18 months ago at least now, I was wandering around the park one day, and a member of the public sort of came up to me and he said, you know, oh, I recognize you. We got chatting about the whole the Olympic thing, and I said, where do you live? And he said, I just live over, you know, in Stratford over there. He said, you know, this has been absolutely wonderful for us. You know, it's lifted the whole area. And so when you get, you know, come back to our original point, you know, how do you engage the public? You know, the Olympic Park has been a great example, really, of being able to demonstrate to the public what infrastructure can actually do to improve the quality of people's lives.
I mean, just very much on that. I mean, again, social value, I think, is something that's really important within our sector, and I sense more and more now firms are, you know, looking at, you know, the difference that they really do make to people's lives in terms of the projects that they undertake, and also the way they undertake those projects as well. I mean, do you think, you know, how important do you think, you know, social value is in terms of our industry, and what can we do more to ensure that it's better understood in terms of the work that we do?
Well, again, I think it's, if you look at what we have to do in the early stages of a project, if you're the designers, if you're the geotechnical engineers going out, automatically raising concern about, well, what's going on here? Or if you're the contractor during the construction phase, how you handle that, that is an opportunity to start to talk to local people about what it is that you're doing, how you're going to go about it, listening to their concerns, taking note of their concerns, seeing how you can reflect some of those concerns. Can they be dealt with in the design? If they can't be, then explaining what the challenges are. By and large, people are a lot more understanding if you just make the effort to explain to them why something is as it is. These are the choices we've looked at, and this is where we are, and so on. You're never going to convince everybody because of their lives are being affected. But when you can talk to them and show them what those end results are going to be, then I think you start to create that involvement of what is the social value of what's being achieved here. And I think you saw at the weekend I did on the BBC, it was an interesting program about the St. James Church graveyard next to Euston Station, a whole 1 hour program about 16,000 graves which are having to be exposed, and the history which is being revealed about that, better understanding of the way people lived, etc., etc. I mean, in a funny way, that sort of program and that aspect of something, people will enjoy almost more than something about, well, this is how we're going to pour the concrete and so on. This is where the steel, because it touches on human life. And here we've got this massive project, HS2, but actually at the beginning of it, this opportunity to touch on society, to touch on the wider aspects of society, and how having to build this project is providing that opportunity for people to look back into the past, understand the past, and just why is that graveyard there? You know, what sort of people were buried in it, and who's in it, and so on. All of which is being revealed. It's a small side aspect of the whole project, but for the local people, for people in London, and gaining people's understanding of the project, I think it's a great opportunity to add social value.
I think that impact on people and on society, I just want to sort of, I want to turn to a few final questions on those issues really, and probably maybe some, you know, more personal type questions as well, if I may, not too personal, obviously. But first of all, what's been your proudest moment in your working life? If you had to pick one, or maybe I might allow you to pick two, what would that be?
Well, I think it's if I can take two. I mean, the most challenging job, and the one which, in that sense, gave me enormous sort of satisfaction, was Network Rail, because you are providing that public service every day. You've got to try and make sure it works every day. It's an enormous challenge for everybody involved in it to be part of that. and to have that responsibility for trying to make sure that our rail network every day was delivering what it needed to deliver for the public, I think is, you can see it in everybody who works in the railway. It's a family, you know, and they are there because they want to provide that service. So that was something which was very challenging but very enjoyable, and I was very proud to be involved in it. And then, of course, as I said just now, I mean, you couldn't help but be proud of what Britain did, what the team of so many thousands of people did in producing the Olympics. And it provides the nation with a lift. It's created a fantastic new place in London, and it was done in a phenomenally collaborative way, which for me has become a theme of how I think we need to tackle our major projects. Collaboration has to be at the root of how we deliver a successful project through all the members of the team and the different disciplines, the different companies and so on. That level, people said to us when we surveyed them at the end of the Olympics, or how was it for you being experienced in the delivery of the Olympics? And they, so often we got the response, we've never known so much collaboration before between all the players.
What's your favourite construction project, either to work on or to look at? I mean, it could be a project, could be a building. What would that be? A bit unfair. Sometimes you change your views, but
it's very difficult. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I mean, I was the second Severn crossing. I mean, all engineers like building. You know, building a bridge is sort of one of those things out there for engineers. And creating the joint venture, I mean, creating joint ventures gives you a great deal of satisfaction when they work, and because you're bringing, in that case, different nationalities together. It was a fabulous project. I wasn't the project director. Norman Haste was the project director. But I mean, I always, you know, get a buzz when I drive over that bridge. Same way as I always get a buzz when I, you know, on the Eurostar train going down the Channel Tunnel rail link, thinking about all the challenges that people overcame in delivering that. The restoration of St Pancras, of course, is absolutely glorious. I mean, it probably is the best terminal in the world, I would say, at the moment, in terms of how it works and what it stands for. So there, you know, I come back to your original question: why get involved in this industry? Because you have that opportunity to create, be involved in playing your part in teams, and there's nothing better than working in a team in creating these phenomenal structures, buildings, things which actually work and are useful to everyone. I mean, what can be more satisfying than that?
absolutely. And it's interesting there you talk about transport, and clearly the transport sector is one sector in particular that's really been affected by the current COVID-19 crisis, which I suppose on the one hand, nobody could have predicted the extent of the effect of this crisis at the present time. What impact do you think that, you know, this crisis will have on infrastructure policy? I suppose we can see the effect it's having on it in the short term, but maybe in the medium term, how do you think this is going to play out as we move forward, and what lessons are there to be learned for our industry?
Well, for the last few months, I've been saying it's early days, you know, I think it is still relatively early days. At the National Infrastructure Commission, we are about to start a piece of work in looking at trying to understand the potential behavioural changes which will flow from COVID, and what the impact of those behavioural changes will have on our systems. And you know, you can see that at the moment people will say, well, are we going to need as much transport as we've had in the past? Is it going to reduce the load on transport? I mean, for those who've been suffering commuting into London for the last 10 years, reducing the load by 15%, they'd be delighted. You know, it's more chance of getting a seat. So I think those sort of behavioural changes, we're going to have to see just how far they go, to what extent. Clearly, we can see that the digital world is enabling us will potentially enable people to choose to work from home more days. Lots of companies are saying they now believe that probably they'll never go back to a full 5-day a week, everybody in the office every day, but there'll be more flexibility, which of course could be, it'll be challenging in some ways because we need that human contact. We need that across the table relationship with people. But at the same time, if it gives people more flexibility in their lives to handle all the challenges they have and they'll fit their work in around it because they can do some of it from home, then that'll be good. I think these changes will be gradual. But the challenge for us, as we were saying earlier on, is that, of course, we're trying to make these decisions 15 years ahead of when we deliver something. So trying to determine what is going to be the demand for something in 15 or 20 years' time today, and is COVID going to affect it, and to what extent is COVID going to affect it, is not going to be easy. But all we can do is sort of take the evidence as best we can, listen to what, see what's happening on the ground, and put that into the equation. But we'll get some things wrong, I'm sure.
Just finally, I just want to finish off, on this. I mean, there's no way we can cover everything. That's impossible in the short time we have available. The industry, society faces many, many challenges. If you had a magic wand, what one key change would you make in the area affecting our industry, affecting infrastructure, affecting construction, to improve things? What would be the magic John Armitt spell that you would cast in order to make things better?
Well, I think I come back to that theme of collaboration. I think we, in the UK, we've had a quite confrontational relationship in the industry, which has built up over the last 200 years, really. And the separation of design from construction, which I think is just absolutely bonkers. I mean, what other industry separates its designers from its manufacturers and its production line? They work totally integrated because, in a sense, you design inside out. You design in a way which you can build. You design a car in a way in which you can easily maintain it, and that requires enormous collaboration between all the parties, and not one which is very confrontational. You've got to do this, and you're going to do this, for me in this way, and this is what I require. There needs to be that dialogue across the table all the time between the clients and the designers and the contractors and the supply chain, the manufacturers. Everybody has a key role to play in this. And if they're not all working together and collaborating together about how to deliver the best possible outcome, then don't be surprised when if projects go pear-shaped. And I would argue they largely go pear-shaped when there's a lack of honesty between the parties, and there's a lack of collaboration and understanding about the challenges and what are going to be done to meet those challenges in a very open and frank way. Just one little experience I had many years ago when we were struggling to hand over a building because we were struggling with the commissioning phase, and I was in on a Sunday and we had everyone around the table discussing what the problem was, or didn't know what the problem was, and so on, and how we were going to resolve these commissioning problems. And one of the subbies stuck his head round the door, saw this room full of grey suits, and immediately tried to retreat. And I said, "Oh, come in, we need you." And so he came in, and I said, "Right, what's your understanding of the issue we've got?" And he said, "Oh, well, it's because we've got this bridge, this metal divider which is missing in the trays." He said, "And we've got current straying across the tray because this should be divided from that. And nobody put the divider in the tray." I mean, just something very simple, which a guy who's actually doing the installation as a subcontractor can see is something which ought to be there, which isn't there. And not problem immediately solved, but you start to then get down the track of what really is underlying it. And it requires everybody in that team to be able to engage in that conversation and not to be kept out of the conversation simply because they're the subby down the end of the line.
I think that's a great point to finish on, which I think really encapsulates everything about this great industry and this great sector, that the whole collaboration element, which obviously without it, we don't exist as an industry. We've run out of time, unfortunately. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd just like to thank you, Sir John, for giving of your time on a Tuesday morning and for answering our questions. That's really kind of you, and we really appreciate it. For those who are watching, please do check out the Infrastructure Intelligence website. Check out our other live events that we've got coming up. We've got an event coming up on Friday, the 2nd of October, which is a roundtable looking at the issue of devolution through the eyes of the northern metro mayors. So please do have a look at that. I'd just like to thank again, Sir John, for your time this morning. And also like to thank our partners for all of these Infrastructure Intelligence live events, the Strategic Communications Consultancy, BECG. Many thanks to them for their input for today, and indeed for all the events. You can find more about them at becg.com. That's it for now. Do check out the website and sign up for our future events. But for now, thanks very much, Sir John, for all your input. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining in. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.